Hi, Katie. Welcome to the Mind Talk podcast. Tell us a little something about yourself.
All right. My name is Katie Flowers. I've lived in Hong Kong 36 years.
Oh,
I know, I came in 1991. I came here to be an international school art teacher.
hmm.
So I have worked in the arts my whole time in Hong Kong. And actually, during the 90s, I worked a lot with the Hong Kong Youth Arts Festival. And we did a lot of projects back then in correctional centres, in Vietnamese camps. And probably we didn't know that what we were doing was very therapeutic art processes. I've learned a lot more about all of that since those 1990 days. And I live on Llama Island. My husband and my son were born here.
Mhm.
Uh, my husband works in the coaching space, but he's also a real avid Jungian reader as well.
Okay. And now you work with Jungian art therapy. So, could you explain what is art therapy? Because it's only very recently that I've actually heard about it. And what is Jungian art therapy specifically?
Definitely, definitely. I'm very passionate to describe what art therapy is
Hmm.
because when you tell somebody at a party or whatever that you're an art therapist, they always say, "Oh, my children would love that," or "I couldn't draw a straight line," or so there's lots of preconceived ideas around
Hmm.
that subject, and ranging from, "Oh, I love coloring in books," all of the above. First of all, I think we have to talk about what art is. I do have a long prop here, which I might pull up in a minute. But if we talk about a kind of a continuum initially of what art is, let's think about what other people might think. Oh, what do you think it is, Rushi, actually?
For me, art is not painting. For me, art is dancing. So it's really
Yeah.
a creative expression of how I'm feeling within.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. And
Oh,
that yeah, that's absolutely perfect, of course. Yeah, the creative arts. In a way, I'm using visual arts, but I
mm,
was trained in expressive arts, which includes dance and music, and I've worked in both those spaces. Yes, art as an expression is my currency and yours. But of course, other people, lots of people, they love landscape painting or drawing or printmaking, and really using art to talk about the external world, which is beautiful and
mhm,
amazing. And that's one way we can use our art. Another way that we can use our art is kind of pattern making and doodling and design. And I love doing that as well, as you can see by lots of things behind me. And that's very much of, if we talk about visual art here, the offers us a therapeutic sense of having a breathing space usually in where we are and having and like getting into our flow state, which is inevitably welcomed by people. And so we could call it a way to regulate the emotional system in
mhm.
that way. So then we can use art for that. We can also use art in the advertising world and lots of ways outside. But I think what pulled me out of being an international school art examiner, which is what
Mhm.
I was, my driving need to work with the arts as an expressive tool, because that's what they are for me. And I've been creating art in art journals all my life, and we can thank my mum for that. And I realized that's been my way of talking to myself. It started with little outside sketches, and it started as sticking things in, but it morphed over time into ways that I wanted to explore my inner world, or relax my inner world, or find out more about myself. So actually, I came to Carl Jung way back in the 90s when I was doing this kind of work, but I didn't know that there was such a thing as art therapy. So I'm going to carry on
Okay.
talking about what art can be. When I talk about expressive arts, it might be ways that we can. And nobody's technically going to look inside this book. It's mine. And might be having a bad day, might want to express it visually. Again, you talked about dancing for yourself. Some people like to paint and explore with colors. So many ways that we can express. Those are all what we call therapeutic arts.
Mhm.
And then we get to, I'm going to hold up my little visual here. It's very long, so I won't be able to fit it all in. But really, when we talk about art therapy, we're talking about a therapeutic one-on-one encounter with our inner world, which is why I've included the bottom of the iceberg there. And usually with a guide, always with a guide if it's a therapeutic encounter. And yes, why Carl Jung? Why Jungian art therapy? And that is really because Jung's currency and life's work, as you know now, is working with helping us to look at ourselves as this top part of the iceberg, which is our conscious mind, and this gorgeous gift of gold and fascination, which is the lower part of the iceberg. So right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm having a kind of a conscious conversation, but I'm tapping into my memories, which are down here,
Yeah.
making sure I say the right thing, tapping into my deep knowledge. And Carl Jung shone really the spotlight on this idea of the conscious and unconscious mind and how the journey of bridging the gap, if you like, or I would prefer to call it slipping between the veil of those two, is where art can come in.
So,
Because, go on,
yeah, sorry. No, no, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
because that, and Carl Jung's world was the world of dreams, images, and symbols. And of course, that's the world of the art therapist. For me, in many ways, I don't think you can call yourself an art therapist without realizing that you are using a Jungian interface or a Jungian practice. So it's inherent in the profession, but I suppose I've dropped into it in a more intentional way because
Mm.
of my driving need to understand my process and to understand what's happening. Why can I talk to myself? Why can my clients respond to visual images in this way? So that's one of my pathways into Jung, a need to understand my day-to-day work.
Now, Jung did a lot of work in psychoanalysis. And as you showed the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, and going in and really analyzing what's that inner world coming out in artwork. When I was doing my reading on Carl Jung's art therapy, he uses a lot of symbols, active imagination, and all of that to really understand what's going on beneath the surface. So one is how do you as an art therapist make sense of those symbols?
So there's three parts to that. The primary part is it isn't me that makes sense of the symbols, it's the
Hmm.
client.
Okay.
So I'm a companion or a guide and a witness, and I set up the dialogue and the situation and the container, if you like. But the client or the individual or yourself or
Mhm.
myself are really the only people that can work with an image that you've created. And I'll explain why. I'll come back to active imagination in a minute. And if we can say that a symbol, for now, we'll say that a symbol is a visual image that we've created in a therapy setting. And it may be in response to a question, or it may be in response to a bigger, wider issue. Whatever it is in response to, there's then a triangle, which is the client, the artwork, and the therapist. So my job is to help the client interface between that conscious and unconscious. But really, the next question is why? Why do we need to do that? So if you imagine we are born as a pure template, a pure version of self, all of us come into the world that way. And as we're growing up, we're figuring out what works and what doesn't work in our life. We're learning behaviors from our family, from our parents, and we're receiving messages all the time of this is how you behave. And if you behave like this, that will happen. So it's a kind of a frequently a transactional way that we learn how to be in the world. And if we just take that As I'm going to use one that I probably grew up with was my mum was always saying to me, "Oh, good girl, well done." If I was very polite, she would say, "Good girl." So I received the message from my mum that being polite meant doing this, speaking in that way, and that I had a lot of praise from my mum when I was academically successful. She loves that. Now, another parent might not notice that, but that became a currency where I was regarded as successful in that way. So sometimes we receive a different message from our parents, and I'll just use a different example, which again is about how parents approve of children. And that is if you become a good girl or a good boy by taking care of everybody, then you begin to appreciate that caring for everybody is the behavior that I want to move towards. So we're learning how to be, and we're learning at the same time what we call adaptive behaviors. The adaptive behaviors are the way that we figure out how to be in the world and how to get approval and how to get love. And they're not always healthy, and they're usually what travel with us throughout our life and become the material which is contained here. And so, in a way, I always say to people, it's very important to realize that your unconscious is driving your bus. You think you are.
Yeah.
You think your conscious mind is driving your bus. But those adaptive behaviors are still traveling with you. And so we can say that those reside down here. So this is content that we know, and we can say it's our thoughts, our actions, our awareness. Jungian scholars would call it the known, if you like. Whereas this is everything that I have perceived or has happened to me in my life, but I'm not thinking about it right now. It's all down here. Or it could be everything perceived by my senses in terms of smells, in terms of things that you hear, and that abides down here. All your what we call procedural memories, how to
Mhm.
clean your teeth, how to tie your shoelaces, and then what we call implicit memories. So
Mhm.
different for all the different memories that we've had, everything that's ever happened to us, whether we've noticed it or not, everyone's got a huge backpack of all of this every day. And that drives our conscious connection. It drives our unconscious behaviors, biases, and ways of being and ways of speaking. And so anything that's landed here is affecting how we interface with the world. Does
And
that make sense?
those symbols that then show up in one's artwork is a window into that unconscious. And the meaning making of the symbol is a window to the unconscious.
Yes, that's exactly right. As I say, this is a kind of an interface. And how we tap into our unconscious mind are our dreams. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast. And art making provides a way to access unconscious material in ways that we don't realize will happen until we're engaged with the actual process. And it allows us capacity to work with some of these adaptive behaviors, which, to use Jungian language, become complexes,
Mm.
difficult behaviors that happen to us and pervade our life. And an example of a complex would be somebody who's a real perfectionist,
Yeah.
somebody probably like me who likes to be a good girl. I like approval. We like it or not, we've all got them. And some, of course, become debilitatingly difficult depending on where they've come from. And we can, our complexes also come from traumatic events that have been recorded in our life. So this is really the work of an art therapist is to help a client make that interface between these two. And the reason that we do that is because when we bring unconscious material out into the world and it's in front of us, then it becomes something we've started a stage of becoming aware of it. And the next stage might be that we learn to accept it and that we learn to work with it and dialogue with it. and we learn to bring it into what's called a kind of apperception, which is the contents of the conscious mind. And if you like, it's like closing a gap between something very difficult, bringing it safely into the daylight, and submerging it into the what we call the self.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
It is complex, I will say that. But it actually it's really so different than talk therapy, which is what I'm used to. And I'm also relating it. So I have two questions for you, right?
Yeah.
So I've been meditating for a very long time. And some of the advice that I've received from gurus in India is don't bother with the symbols, images, whatever comes up. You just stay with your breath and you just continue to observe that. On the other hand, you ask your clients to actively engage with the symbols and see what meaning it makes for them. So I'm trying to correlate to very
Yeah.
different ideas, but the goal of both is to come to the same space.
That's a great question. And I think in a way they're almost possibly a route to come to the same space, but they're also a route to come to slightly differing but more healthy spaces.
Okay.
So I think, again, just to remind people that the word symbol is really just a kind of a Jungian word for the image that you might create.
Mm.
Bearing in mind, in art therapy, you might create with clay, you can create with many other materials. So
Okay.
the symbol is what you create, but that symbol can only be part of you. It can only be part of the self in certain ways because it has come from you. Although I'm going to add something onto that in a minute. But to answer this question, it's you. Now, your
Mm.
guru is helping you to learn an entirely different process. He's not asking you to, if you like, seek insight from diving deep and coming back up again. And I obviously can't speak to what he's actually asking you in terms of insight. That is, he's almost helping you, I suppose, hone something and is saying we don't need all this extraneous information for this process.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I say they're circuitously going to a similar route. But I suppose if somebody arrives in a therapeutic space, they're arriving with whatever it is that they've brought to the table. And believe me, and you know this already, that people don't really know what they've brought to the table quite often.
Yeah.
They will arrive with A, and of course, after time, what emerges and surprises everybody is B.
Yes.
Because everything, if we like, and I'm going to use the iceberg that is down there, is driving us. And if we can't see it, then it's in what we call a blind spot. So everybody's got blind spots. We've all got them. We're made of this huge repertoire of things we know, things we think we know, things we can't see. And those blind spots can sometimes be the damaging drivers, not always, but can be. And so that's why people present in therapy without necessarily knowing what it is they're there for.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to go back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast is when people choose to create artwork, maybe landscape, maybe portraits or whatever, that's very external. But I also find it very interesting that each person really chooses what they want to work with. I love drawing a lot of modern stuff. My one of I actually went to an art exhibition, I think maybe 2 or 3 years back, and there were such amazing paintings. But the one painting that really caught my eye was a woman in high heels. Such a simple painting, right? And my friend said to me, a woman in high heels, really? Just stand in central and you'll see that. But although that's an external of what I like to see and what I like to draw, like tall buildings in Hong Kong and all of that, it's still related to the unconscious or the subconscious in a way, right? Because why do I choose? such a modern urban kind of a painting,
Yeah.
while somebody might choose a landscape. So can you talk about
Perfect,
that a little bit?
perfect question. Absolutely perfect question. And the reason that is a perfect question is because it shines a light on what helps us read any image at all. What we're referring to here is what are called associations. You have associations with that image. Let's just talk about high-heeled person. And maybe you're not sure why, but there might be somewhere something in there where there that content is created with certain colors, is created with certain motifs. Let's say the heels, let's say the woman. It's created with a place, atmosphere, situation, wherever it is. And each of those contain an association for you. And together, it contains another association for you. And the more you explore it and travel into it, as it sounds like you are doing, maybe you're defining or refining what your associations are with that image. And you don't necessarily need to know if it's just about you appreciating them. But those kind of associations are very important sometimes in helping people find unconscious material within themselves. Which leads me to one of the things that also brought me to a Jungian path would be that, as I referred to earlier, in the 90s, I was living in Hong Kong and I had a very small house, and I started making my own set of tarot cards.
Okay.
I had a group of people, a very spiritual group that I worked with for at least a decade, and we would often use different tarot decks or oracle decks, anything at all to help us explore or talk about our life that month, whatever it
Mhm.
was. And in exploring this, I discovered this concept of the major arcana. Contained in those cards are worldwide archetypes and archetypal figures. And so I began researching this concept of archetypal figures, and I started making my very own cards. I have gone on to publish my own cards since then because I've learned a lot more, and I've learned the power of what we call the projective image. Now, the projective images, these people say to me, this is my set of oracle cards. People say to me, they're amazing. How do they work? I can't believe they've made me think of blah, 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 whatever it is. And they tell me how they use them and everything else. But the reason for that is people are constantly bringing their own personal associations to the table. So, really, an image like your image with the lady with the high heels becomes a mirror if we stop and explore it and start dialoguing with it. Oh, I wonder what you've got to say to me. I wonder why you're showing up in my life. And it may not be anything very obvious about who she initially represents to you, but it's a beautiful doorway and a beautiful portal into you exploring whatever it is. But the reason that I say it has relevance for you, but also, as you describe it, I brought up to my mind a visualization. For some reason in my mind, the woman was wearing red shoes.
He was.
Funny, right? So I'm building my own visual of her and pondering, ooh, Rushi, how about that image? Maybe that shows me a bit more about Rushi. How fascinating. Ooh, I'm curious now. Who is she to you? And I would be saying to you, you need to have a little dialogue with her, a little chat, and give you some little dialogue questions to find out more. So everything visual that comes to us mirrors back to us our associations, our memories, and associations are memories, and can also give us a little glimpse into archetypal content that is speaking to us. That's another part of the unconscious, which we can get to. Does that I may not have answered your actual question, but I may have
Well,
answered some.
actually, you did because it makes sense. I don't mind going a little further and talking about my experience because while I liked all of those urban paintings, and I went to the other spectrum and I liked paintings. I think it was a Chinese artist, and she drawn small houses like cottages, but in the clouds and deep into the forest. And that's really who I am. I'm this big city urban person, but there's also a part of me who'll run away to these. I want to sit in a forest and meditate and not meet anyone for days or even weeks and months together if I don't mind. So that's both me. But one thing is to make sense of these symbols and get in touch with who you are. But then how does that translate into individuation and personal growth and all of that?
Okay, so I'll answer. That's a few questions. So anything that we do, if you like, that is, and most things are in certain ways, I'll qualify that and say, in this instance, when we start to become curious about our inner likes, dislikes, drives, what makes us tick, that's fertile ground for self growth and self development right there, because that's self awareness. And really, those are the stages that sometimes we're at the margins of those. We know we're really at the margins of self development, self awareness, depending on who it is. Sometimes where people are ferociously curious about those margins, which is what drives me in my work. Some people don't really want to know because it could all be a bit terrifying. So we're all at different places with that self development curiosity. And that kind of curiosity can often lead people into into a reflective practice, which might be written journaling. It might be using the arts to explore. It might be chatting to somebody else. So we can say self-awareness and self-development might come first, reflective practice might come next, and diving deeper might be deliberately creating art. It might be quite interesting to ask you, for example, to create yourself a piece of art in response to High Heel Woman. Not of High Heel Woman, but a piece of response art and what she wakes up in you. You know
Okay.
that, and that would be some way that then you express in a symbol system, if you like, what's going on for you. And you might, and the likelihood is it would give you some kind of insight that and you'd go, yes, I recognize that now, because it's just below the surface, if you like. And so those are ways that we can develop, and they're very useful ways to develop capacity for diving a bit deeper into who we are. Because the more we dive into that and the more we help our unconscious material come a little higher up towards this kind of conscious perception, if you like, then the more we're learning about the self. So then to take that into the other part of your question, which is how does that help with the individuation process, which is really sort of Jung's life work was about his own individuation process. And of course, he was a person that entered the creative world and made himself the subject of his own research deeply and most profoundly for decades, exploring his own symbology and his own expressive work in order to help other people. Great research. And so his life's work, if you like, was helping us all get to what we call that individuation process. And I can't say it's a state. We don't journey towards it and then we're individuated, hooray, a flag at the top of the mountain. But it's really that lifelong journey of self knowledge, self growth. And the more that we bring our unconscious material, if you like, into the daylight, and it isn't always easy, and sometimes it's And if it's traumatic, it's deeply painful, which is
Mhm.
why it has to be done in a safe container of therapy, of a therapeutic relationship, actually. The more we're settling into knowing ourselves and knowing who we are, it's offering yourself, it's mental health. Knowing the self and learning that is building your mental health capacity.
It's interesting what you said because you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that we are all born as, did you use the word pure souls?
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
I
And
think
this work is basically going back to that space, to that self, the way we were born. Because as we live through life, we have all these layers put on, be a good girl, do this, do that, become adaptable enough to fit into the system. And the work that you do is really peeling those layers and layers and making one the conscious and the unconscious so that we can go back to the way we were born.
or actually, as you, you know what, as you were describing that, I thought of a really silly but strange analogy that might make it clear. It's almost as if we're kind of cleaning out the broom cupboard of all of those things that happened along the way that were tricky and dusty and difficult. So the emergence of, or the continued existence of you is healthier, easier, and closer to being that version of your pure self. It won't ever be that because of everything that's happened to you. But you're. If we take the concept of self, and I'll just use a little hand gesture to put it in your memory, then yes, we're working towards being that healthier version of this self. And yes, it brings that kind of work brings you much closer into being who you are in terms of your essence.
And what a beautiful way to do it with bright colors and different textures and papers and artwork.
Oh yeah, and that we can find out an awful lot about ourselves with a scribble. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be in any way a resolved artwork to offer us information. But what it does involve is us being curious about whatever it is. And two qualities that I would say to people, if you're starting this work for yourself and you're doing it not necessarily in a therapeutic relationship, but you're doing therapeutic work for you, is to just come to that work with this premises of, or this attitude of curiosity and
Mhm.
kindness. Because that's often, people are often harshest on themselves. When I'm doing a lot of work about stress with teenagers and we talk about the layers of where stress comes from, or even adults, bankers, anybody, the stress for most people comes from the self. Trying to learn to come to this self-development work with an attitude of softness, passion, and kindness is really important. Otherwise, we just go straight back into inner critic, and everybody's got one of those. That's a lifelong journey for lots of us.
That's a
Working.
lifelong journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Katie, for our chat today. And there's so much to talk about with Carl Jung and his work and art therapy. But that's all for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rushi. Nice to meet you.
Same here.